right, so now we're finally ready to make our rocky shore material. Before we go any further though, I was kind of looking over the videos and making sure we had everything set up right. I had to actually recreate this guy, so I recreated this off of the video where we left it. But the other thing that I noticed, I left it in the notes of the stratified rocks video. I had forgotten to change the last pixel processor node to grayscale. So I just want to go over that quickly right now with you. That's this one. So I'm going to drag this out here since we're going to need it anyway. And then I'm just going to right click and open reference. And we dealt with sort of redoing this in the previous video. Again, if you want to leave it as the original, that's fine. What I'm talking about is this right here, which I had let this output remain at color, whereas in fact it should be grayscale. If you don't have this set as a grayscale, it will not work as a height output. And that's that. Okay. The other thing that I want to do is I kind of want to switch this around. And it's not because there's a right or wrong, it's because I had worked out the colors in a certain way, and it ended up being easier to deal with if I switched the order that I have these materials. So what I ended up doing was I ended up putting the strata here. I put this one here. Those are my cracks. I had the stratified rock. My height strata went here. And then we are going to bring in our volcanic rock. Make sure I get the right one. Volcanic rock. And that ends up going, again, it's the height map that we want. And that ends up going in here. And the reason I did this is because later on, when we're going to be dealing with colors, if I need to, because I had different, we'll experiment because I like to do that as, you know, because it's never going to come out the same, so you might as well just go with what you got. But this setup here, these two, the stratified rock and the cracks, are very black and white maps. Whereas the volcanic rock map is a more subtle thing, and it's a more overall gray. If and when it comes time to mess around with levels, and I'm thinking specifically for the color map, these two, if we start to do, in other words, I can draw this one off and put it into a levels node. And these two are going to pretty much always want the same kind of treatment because they're both very similar in the fact that they have very few gray areas. Whereas this one is mostly gray areas. And so it will probably not want the same treatment. And if I separate them out this way, it means less nodes down the road. So that's the logic behind switching this out, even though, and it still remains true, that ultimately the order that you put these things is really about which type of material you want next to another material. So it's not like there's a right or wrong answer. It's just that from experience, once I see the materials together, it's just, it potentially saves problems down the road just to build it like this, and that's because of the lack of grayscale in these two materials and the fact that this is mostly grayscale. Okay, I hope I made that clear. Now, what we, oh well, you know, let's set this up. We've got right now, we've got this set up as our color. We've got this sort of temporary. Let's make that the correct resolution. We've got the temporary water in there. We don't yet have a normal map. Let's just do that for now. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to get a normal color in there. Maybe that'll work. It probably will work, actually. It's just a flat. It's not getting any input information. That's probably fine. Again, we're going to just create some. We just want to look at the color for the moment. We've got roughness. We'll make this sort of a neutral mid-range. We'll change it to a grayscale. Put that in there. Metallic, we're not going to have any, at least for now. I like to put a wee bit of metallic in my rock, but that's just at the very end, maybe. Let's move these so our height is near our normal. And for the height map is what we're going to work on now. Okay. So, you know what? Yeah, these are going to end up being like this for the color. So I'm just going to copy these and paste them for our height map, because we're going to do some extra stuff to them. But I think I've mentioned before, you kind of want to have, well, first of all, do this as few times as possible, because again, as far as the way the from an optimization point of view, the further something is, the further a variable or something that needs calculation is away from the end node, the more it's going to take, because every time it passes through these nodes, it's got to do math. If there's a variable involved in there, it's going to have to recalculate that variable every single time. So in an ideal world, you would have all of the nodes that have any kind of calculations with variables involved as your very last node. Now, clearly, that's impracticable. But the way we're going to build this material, we're going to try to use this flow of information as efficiently as possible. So we're going to try to reuse maps downline whenever possible. And I'll kind of go through that as we go. Right, so where were we? The first thing we want to establish is, yeah, so here I'm copying this. I'm not reusing it off of this. Because we're going to be doing two different things with this information. This group here will ultimately feed into our color and normal information. So we don't want it as affected. We want this to stay kind of a crisp black and white or nearly black and white map as we can, because it's going to delineate our details. What we're going to do with this group down here is we are going to set up the overall heights of our rocks. So this map is going to have a lot, it's going to go from black to white via these zones. So we've already got the actual depth, what we're calling depth, we can open this up so we can take a look at our reference. We've got, the depth set up here with the variables with the input parameters that we exposed. So that's taken care of. We need to kind of do the same thing here by zone, and we're gonna. It's pretty straightforward. We're gonna just do it with levels. So let's move this into a good position. Let's also label our. Actually, we'll pull them all. We can label them later. These are our three materials. So all we really want to do is give each one of them its own levels node. And what this level node is going to do is it's going to take care of the overall height of the material. So it's not going to worry about the differential between the gray and the black here. It's going to take the whole thing. It's going to, what, wrong one. It's going to gray it down or bring it back to white. And that's all this is going to do. So for each one of these, we want to set up an input parameter. So we've got strata height. Actually, we had group. We're going to have groups. So we're going to just call this height, and we're going to call the group strata, and we'll set the default at, I don't know, let's call it 0.5 for 1, and max is going to be 1. And then we're going to do the same thing for cracks. And again, let's set the default at 0.5. Actually, no, you know, we're going to set this up, well, let's just set it at 0.5 for now. That's all for that one. And then last but not least, we're going to have volcanic rock. Right. We actually don't. We wanted, I think, at 1. That's why you know, I have this really weird thing where I always get it backwards. So let's go ahead and change these now. I have problems with left and right too. I'm sure it's connected. Okay, so that's going to basically leave them alone right now. And we can attach them, so that's our stratified rock. This is our cracks. And this is our volcanic. Okay, so that's all set in. And now, if we look here, we can start to, oh, we can't, we have to do it here. We can start to fool around with our various heights. So this is now, it's keeping the depth that we created in the original map, but it's taken that whole thing and it's moving it up and down. And we may as well just finish up with this and expose the rest of these as well. So let's make the depths now too. I'm just going to close this for now. It's just not enough room. So we're going to call this strata depth. I don't know. I'm going to, we'll copy them out. Cracks depth. And finally, volcanic rock depth. Make all those spellings right. Let's move these guys together. Okay. So I can go back here and I see my depth is by default this. So I'm just going to copy that in, and I'm just going to go down the line and I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. So that's those exposed. So now each one of our materials has two parameters that can be manipulated for the height and then the depth. Now, the one thing that we haven't dealt with yet is this part of it. So here, this is very straightforward. We're just going to put this in, and since it's a black and white map, it's going to automatically turn that to black for us, which is exactly what we want, and that is now our height map. So let's publish this out and see what that looks like. I'm going to yeah, I'll write over it. We can always publish it. If we need to see it again, we can always make a new copy of it. Okay. So this, give it a moment to do its thing. Oh, you know what? Maybe I'm just going to get a normal color. I think that's what I was having a problem with. Oh. Okay. Right. So here we are. Here's our zones. We can come in here and take a look at our exposed parameters. Oops. Did we forget to expose the depths? We did. So that is strata depth. And this is cracks depth. And this, notice, as I'm exposing these processing numbers are going up because I just gave it another thing to do on its way out here. So let's see what this one does. As I expose it, it's going to go from volcanic depth. It just jumped up by about 20 milliseconds or so. And that's because all of a sudden it's going to have to make one more extra calculation every time it passes through a node. So if you're having problems with your materials and you're looking to optimize, one way of doing that is by leaving less exposed parameters. So you might come to a point where you're making a decision, okay, well, I'm going to have to, for example, the stratified rock, I'm going to set it at a certain height, and then I'm going to, I'll unexpose the parameter, I'll set it at a certain height, and I'm just not going to let people mess around with that, and that's going to lighten the load as far as the processing going down the tube here. So we're not anywhere near that stage yet, and we will publish this out. And now we should get all of our various exposed parameters. Here we go. So we can now Let's try to get the try to find a little bit more room in here. So we can now play with like our strata height. So this is dealing with the actual height of the stone itself. And then this is dealing with how shallow or how deep it goes. And I'm just going to make sure that all of these are working as advertised. And that's my height. And then between these two, you can, you can get a pretty good range of things that you can do with the rock. Okay, so that works great. We've set up the color, sort of the basis for our color and our normal. I'm going to move all this stuff back. We're going to organize a little bit. And then we are going to leave this video and pick up in the next one where we are going to take care of our color map first. And from the color map, we're going to move on to the normal. All right, so this we're going to call our, adding a frame, our height controls. Right. So color will be next.